Hello YouTube, this is Mahadeva the Thunder Wizard. Alright, so today I'm going to start reading from another one of my books. This one is called Mounting Sleipnir. And this particular book is, at the time when I first started putting together this path, my goal was to write this book. And this book originally, and maybe I'd say this, it's been a long time since I read it, so maybe I say this in the book, but this book was designed to be a workbook for people to follow the path. That ended up being more the first book, which is the Thunder Wizard Path, but people were wanting me to teach them a step-by-step practice. What that turned into is the Patreon page, the thunderwizard.com. The videos on the first level of the subscription page there, that is what ideally this book was meant to be. But this book turned into something else altogether. And the first part of it was the book that I've already read. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch Mounting Sleipnir and all the different things. And I was Mounting Sleipnir, that whole book, was just meant to be an introduction to this book. And that introduction just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I decided, well, I guess I'm writing two books here. So this second book, after you read the introduction of Awakening Sleipnir. Awakening Sleipnir is really about helping you have the correct mindset. What I found when I started working in this path and trying to teach it is that most of the people to whom it was directed were still locked in Christian thinking, whether they were Christians or not. And so it was really important for me to try and give across what I felt was the necessary base assumptions and understandings so that then you could understand what all of this was about. Because as I have said numerous times in the beginning, I ran into what I didn't know any of this stuff existed. I didn't know there was neo-heathenism and Asatru and Odinism. I didn't know any of that stuff existed. I was just waking up to some information that was coming to me, which was of my ancestral heritage. And so I felt it necessary to address what I thought to be a complete departure from how our ancestors thought and how they functioned. So that's what Awakening Sleipnir was all about. So I'm going to read from this book, but before I do that, I am going to share with you something that I saw when I was doing some research. I thought I started thinking about the directions, and I started once again looking into the linguistics behind the names for the directions. So I uncovered a little bit more about that, and so I'll share that with you first, which is the most interesting one, which I think I talk about in this book, is the word north. And north is a really old word. And so north comes from, I believe, a very ancient Proto-Germanic word, Nerthuj. Nerthuj, as I've investigated it and studied it, first on the surface it means left and under. And this is really important, left and under. What that tells you is that our ancestors were the same as any kind of other indigenous shamanic group, which means around the globe, for the most part, everybody orients themselves to the rising sun. So they start from that perspective. The perspective is that, whenever you want to orient yourself, you first find out where does the sun come from, and you face that direction. I'm facing basically that direction now, and so from there, that's where you start from. Then what is left? Well, that would be north. Now the other thing is it's called under, left and under. Interesting thing, those of you flat earthers, you're not going to like this, but when you're in the northern hemisphere, north is, the curvature of the earth is going down and away from the sun. So that would be under. It also represents a connection to the earth because the earth is down. And so the idea was that as you were going towards what was cold, you were going under, you were going down. So on top of that, you have this TH sound, ner, and then the th, nerth. And then, of course, we have the connection to the goddess Nerthuj. If you've done any research, Nerthuj was the earth mother goddess that, according to the Roman historians, was really important for the Germanic tribespeople. So much so, there was no nation, there was no Germany, there was no Germanic nation. There was just a bunch of tribes who happened to be of the same ethnic and linguistic background. Of course, there would have been slight differences here and there and all over the place. And of course, each tribe had its own local deities and, family deities and those kinds of things. But they shared in common some of the deities we worship. And one of them would have been Nerthuj. Nerthuj was the earth mother goddess that was so revered that there were priests who would travel around to all of the different Germanic tribes, and they would take this cart with them that was sort of like the Holy of Holies. It had, who knows what it was, but it was like the feeling I get from what I read is that there's this sort of box with this curtain around it. And it was on a cart that was being pulled by cows. And wherever this cart went, according to the understanding, is that the goddess would tell the priest, or would give the priest the instinct on where to take the cart. And wherever the cart went, all hostilities had to come to an end, and everybody had to put their weapons away. And so this was the power of Nerthuj, that wherever she went, no matter what was going on, people had to stop fighting. And then people had to come together, and there was feasting and partying and all kinds of other worship stuff we don't know anything about. And then when it was time when the goddess had decided she wanted to go back home, there was a temple. We don't know where, but there was a temple, and they would bring the cart back, and whatever was in that box, they'd put in the temple. And they would take the curtains that were used to house whatever it was that was in there. We don't know. Maybe it was an idol, maybe it was a rock, maybe it was who knows what the heck it was. We don't know. And then there were slaves. Don't know what that really means. We don't know. But then slaves would go and wash the curtains, and depending on which translation you look at, they were either ritually drowned as sacrifices to Nerthuj, or something would happen where they would be drowned. Like as they're washing it, the waters would take them down and drown them. Interesting thing is I find all this stuff and I read it, and then I don't remember where I found it. So you just have to take my word for it that I did find it. This was a recent thing. Somebody was talking about a lake somewhere in the Alps, or somewhere in Germany, or somewhere in Germany, I think it was. And there was all these stories about that the lake was haunted. and that the lake, he stayed away from that lake in modern times, and that there was a connection to the goddess Hertha, which is Nerthus. It's just another later pronunciation of Nerthus, Hertha, which could also be earth. So we don't, it's kind of hard to put it all together. So Nerthus could have been the word for earth. But anyways, so these crazy things happen at this lake where all kinds of crazy stuff happens. And I can't remember the stories, but the stories were just unbelievable about the really frightening things that people would experience there as they went to this lake that was supposedly, still the resting place of Hertha. So, depending on how you look at it, and depending on how you read the translation, either they were ritually drowned there as an offering, or they would go and, get in that lake and Hertha would take them. That's kind of what I took from those latest stories, is that I think maybe that might have been the case, more so than how the Romans wanted to describe it. Because bear in mind again, Tacitus is just reading. He's just not reading. He is just recounting, verbal legends and stories, and he's putting it in his sort of Roman scientific mindset. He's translating it for Roman audiences. So the th sound, thuj, has the function of meaning the action of or going toward. So whenever you have the T or the TH on the end of a direction, like north, south, east, west, it means the action of that. So if ner means down, left, under, earth, then going north is going towards the underworld, going towards the earth, Mother Earth. So, we think of Mother Earth now as being this sweet, cute, lovable, but Earth for our ancient ancestors was a really intense thing. She was a really intense power. So yes, she was our mother. Yes, she was healing and nurturing, but she was also, you go into her lake and she's going to take you. The earth takes you. The earth has this power. So that's why, Hela and Hulda and these other earth goddesses have such dark, intense powers to them, because the earth was not just this sweet thing that we walked around. It was a power, and it that's where bodies went. It was had this connection to the underworld. So left and under, it meant, so there's this power of earth, and then there's going towards earth, which would be north. You go north, you're going towards earth. And then you have west. So west would have been Westuj, and west meant the setting sun. So this is where we get in Latin vespers, vespero. So the original term for after sunset was vespero in Indo-European. And pero comes from pra, for, para. It means through, towards. And so vespero meant after sunset. So wes meant sunset. Westuj would have been the action, the direction of sunset. So when somebody says, where is it? You would say Westuj. In other words, go towards the setting sun. Didn't matter where the sun was. It meant go in that direction. It was an action. It was, when you go in that direction, you're part of the flow of that energy. South. I've seen a couple of translations which I think could easily be it. South is Suntuj, Sunth, sun. So the south is if you're in the northern hemisphere, the south is the direction of where the sun is going to be the most powerful. And so you have the north, which is going to be cold and lack of sun. And again, if you're looking at a globe, sorry about this for you flat earthers, but no matter where we go, even our language tells us we live on a globe. If you're going left and under, you're going towards the north away from the sun. And if you're going Suntuj, you're going south, you're going, around towards the equator, which is getting closer to the sun and is warmer. Suntuj. The other one could be Sawulf, which is Sawul means sun. Sawulthuj, which would, again, the energy of the sun. When you want to get the energy of the sun in the northern hemisphere, you go south. And then, what do we have? So north, south, east. And then east, Austuj, Aust. And that meant sunrise. So there's Aus, which is sunrise, which is where we get Easter, Eastre, Eostre. And then you have the direction or the force, that's probably a better way to put it, the force of sunrise, Austuj. So these directions weren't just pointing in directions, they were forces, they were energies that were going. Those directions were constantly doing things. They were forces that were doing things. And it was more like if you're going north, you really got into the flow of that energy, which pushed you towards that energy. You're going east, you're going west, you're going south. These were like energies that were flowing, and they had consciousness and they had power. Now, why am I sharing this? I haven't even got into reading the book yet. Because I was doing some research, just out of curiosity. I wanted to know since I'm here in Australia, what did they think of the directions? So I found online, and I just have to take it at face value, but just found something online here. And I'm going to read it for you because you're going to find out how interesting this is. The reason why shamanism works is because shamanism is where shamans they tap into the forces that exist. They don't make things up. This is why you can have the Taoists and the Germanics, and you can have the Vedics, and you can have all these different, the Siberians. They can all be saying the same thing in their own culture, in their own symbology. And if you look at it and you get past the symbols, you find that the forces of the energies they're talking about are the same. In other words, this is not an arbitrary thing. This is why I don't deal with anything that's been created in recent times. And by recent times, I mean anything after the fall of our indigenous religions, anytime after the introduction of Christianity. I don't look at anything. I don't care if they're well-meaning. I don't care if it's Wiccans or if it's pagans or if it's Western magic. I don't look at that because they're trying to piece things together, and very oftentimes it's arbitrary. They're arbitrarily trying to throw things together. Sometimes they hit and it sort of works. Most of the time, in my experience, you can feel however you want. I hope you don't take it personally. But when I have played around with these things, whether it's Wicca or paganism or Neo-Celtic or Western magic, is that it feels really clunky. If it works, it's really clunky. And it's hard, and it takes a lot of effort to move it around, and there's a lot of intellectual, chaos magic is a good example. Chaos magic says that everything is arbitrary, and you have to load everything with your intention. The symbols themselves don't have any power of themselves. You have to load them. And, the modern rune, quote, masters that are out there, they do this too. I forget the guy's name, but he's like the Pope of neo-heathen rune stuff. You guys know who I'm talking about. But he basically says the same thing. He says that you have to load the runes with your intention, that the runes were empowered by some mythical first rune magician. We don't know who it is. This guy's just making stuff up as he goes because he's going off of Western magic, which says you have to load things with your intention, which means that you don't believe that there's any inherent power within the runes. The shamanic understanding is that the runes existed in and of themselves, and shamans discovered them. So that's the basis I'm coming from here. So when I look at other indigenous practices, I'm open to see if there's a connection. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, or sometimes I can't find it. But the connection here is really clear. So let me read this to you. The concept of cardinal directions is common amongst Aboriginal language groups in Australia. The Walpiri people in Central Australia are especially prominent in this respect, as much of their culture is based on the four cardinal directions that correspond closely to the four cardinal points, north, south, east, west, of modern Western culture. In the Walpiri culture, north corresponds to law. So, one of the Njord is thought to be the Old Norse pronunciation of Njörð. So there's Njörðuj, which would have been the feminine, which would have been the Earth Mother, and then there's Njord, which would have been the masculine. And so he's associated with the sea, with water. The north is in the Germanic tradition is connected to the waters of life, to the ice. But Njord, the god Njord, is also associated with law. He's the god of law. Now, don't get confused, because when we're working with Njord, we place him in the west because he's a Vanir. So the location of the Vanir is west, but his direction could also be, in fact, his name, Njord, might mean north. But since I find it interesting that they saw the north as law, which would be the same as part of what we look at it as. The south is ceremony. This is for the Walpiri people. South is ceremony. So if we look here at our rune wheel, we find something very interesting. Where's my rune wheel? There it is. So if we look on the rune wheel, what is here in the south? We have Raito. Raito means rite, R-I-G-H-T. It also means R-I-T-E, rite, ritual. And a ritual is something you do when you follow the rules, you follow the law, you follow what is right. It has to do with action. That's why, there's right, we call right action, R-I-G-H-T, action. Righteousness, it means the actions that you take are following the law, following the rules. Ceremony. So the south here is ceremony, which I find a connection with what we're teaching here. West is language. That's interesting because as I am teaching here in this, the West is, when we're talking about rune placement of the 9 worlds, the Western direction has to do with the Vanir. And the Vanir are all about interconnection. They're all about community. And so I find that interesting because in order for us to communicate, we need language. Language communicates people. It connects people. Gives us the ability to communicate and to function. And so this is, when I do the 9 world rune reading, it has to do with that. Whatever lands in the West has to do with your relationship. If you're doing a reading on yourself, it has to do with relationship to others. And in the East was called skin. Skin. Again, in the 9 world rune reading, the East has to do with your identity. Whatever rune lands in the East has to do with how you give to yourself. So your skin, your covering, your identity. West is language, how we communicate and cooperate. And East would be your skin, your identity. And then at the center is, they called country. So country meant your home. And they talk about this, when I've read other stuff, wherever somebody dies in at least some of the Aboriginal cultures, they face the body towards where their home is, and they call it their country. So country meant your home. So the center is called country, earth. Middle Earth. We would call it Middle Earth. In our nine world representation here, the center would be Middle Earth. They call that country. I find that really interesting. They're in the southern hemisphere. Obviously, whatever connections the Aboriginals here have to Westerners is got to be at least 50,000 years before we go back to the first human beings that were all together. So we find these things common. The farther you go back in time, the more common you're going to find, even with people who are separated by thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years. So I thought I would share that with you because, again, that's kind of the point here. I'm not here, it's never been my intention to create some racially exclusive anything. This isn't about me trying to find my identity by making myself different from other people. I'm honoring my ancestors by sharing and teaching and studying and practicing the essence of what they taught, but I'm also really open and interested to see how we are all connected to everybody else. And I think that's, again, was my point with the first book of Awakening Sleipnir. So having said that, let's go ahead and get started and start reading. So let's see, where is it? There it is. All right. So Mounting Sleipnir, Indo-European Roots of Pre-Christian Germanic Polytheism, by me, Michael William Denny. All right. So let's start with the introduction. Mounting Sleipnir has been a long time in making. My original intention for this book was to write a supplemental practical workbook to my first book, The Thunder Wizard Path. But as is often the case, the multiverse had other plans. The first version of this book was almost finished when I suddenly and completely lost all of it as a result of the hard drive crashing on my computer. I lost all my data and had to start all over again from scratch. I completely forgot about that. Frustrated, discouraged, and overwhelmed, I started again. But this time, as I wrote, the book began to take on a completely different character. As I kept writing, the book grew longer and longer until I realized I was writing several books. So I went through the lengthy manuscript and extracted chunks of material by subject and emphasis and created several shorter books instead of one long, multifaceted book. The books that have split off from this original manuscript include Shamanism for White People, Awakening Sleipnir, Rune Shamanism, and the Indo-European Medicine Wheel, which later I entitled Thunder Shamanism. In the early stages of writing this book, I found myself writing long essays concerning issues that I felt very passionately about. Some of that passion remains in this book, but the majority of my passionate discourses can be found in Shamanism for White People and Awakening Sleipnir. This book will be focused primarily on my comparative research into the origins of prehistoric Germanic polytheism. For those who have followed my other works, you know that I have some experience in Vedic and Hindu polytheist mysticism. It was that previous experience that I have found to be indispensable in reconstructing an accurate pre-Christian Germanic polytheist mindset, which I believe remains true to its Indo-European roots. Whether we like it or not, Western European culture has been completely transformed from its pre-Roman, pre-Christian Indo-European roots. In many ways, it is completely unrecognizable from its original form. The reason why this fact is so pertinent is because modern Western academia has been projecting its post-Christian, monotheist-influenced mindset onto our ancestors since the Middle Ages. Pre-Christian Teutonic religion was not like modern Christianity, which is based on written dogma. Teutonic polytheism was an oral tradition passed down within families and clans for generations. When the Christian missionaries of the Dark Ages wiped out the indigenous oral traditions and rituals of Northern Europe, there were no written records remaining for successive generations to study. This is why researching our Vedic cousins' religion becomes so important. They did record their ceremonies, history, and beliefs thousands of years before the advent of monotheism. This makes their contributions so significant to modern heathen and pagan mystics. The Vedic Hindus have the benefit of retaining not only the written knowledge but also the uninterrupted mindset of their ancient Indo-European ancestors. This is something that we of European descent were robbed of by Roman imperial Christianity. Much of our modern ideas of our pre-Christian ancestors is heavily influenced by a post-Roman, post-Christianized worldview that was designed by Christian missionaries to erase our ancestral traditions and beliefs from our cultural awareness. These medieval missionaries were very, very successful in erasing our past, but not entirely so. The beliefs and worldview of our ancestors are available to us if we do enough digging in the right areas. With the right understanding, we can rediscover and reconstruct our pre-Christian, pre-Roman, polytheist, animist traditions. In order to truly reconstruct our ancestral religion, we have to first understand our ancestors' animist, polytheist worldview. This cannot be done by merely projecting our modern dualist post-Christian mindset onto the ancient Germanic tribes. In my research, I discovered that concerning our pre-Christian heritage, modern historical and linguistic academia was heavily blinded by medieval Christianized racist biases that linger to this very day. Thankfully, some more recent discoveries in the science of linguistics, archaeology, and DNA research has unveiled newer, more accurate understandings of our Indo-European origins. For those interested in those conclusions, please Google the Paleolithic continuity paradigm. So, in case you don't know what that is, I will cut and paste that for you right now. Where are you? Here we go. There you go. Go check that out. Where was I? If we are serious about understanding our ancestors, their beliefs, and their worldview, we have to discard the previous Indo-European conquest theories, as well as much of what academia has been saying about our ancestors for centuries. I go into great length discussing this subject in Awakening Sleipnir, so I won't belabor the point here. I have not included lengthy footnotes or references in this book. Much of the information here cannot be found in any academic sources. Reason being is that most academics do not have access to much of this information and the sources from which they are derived. If you have doubts about my conclusions, I encourage you to do your own research and come to your own conclusions. The more we research, the better off we will all be in this endeavor. So this again was a long time ago. It's been, I don't know, gosh, at least 10, 15 years since I wrote this. And in the beginning, then that was one of the major criticisms. You know, I've been doing this so long that people just, if they don't buy into it, they've just left me alone and written me off. People do follow it. They know that I've come to my own conclusions pretty much just like I did today. I laid out some stuff today which you're not going to find in any book somewhere. I've taken my experience, my knowledge, and things that are found in history and linguistics, and I've, you know, made some assumptions and presumptions which you can choose to accept or reject. But back then, I was getting a lot of criticism from neo-heathens who took all of their conclusions based on academia, from, you know, what you find in books in college. Which, as you know, I've said, when it comes to a lot of that, and I'm a big believer in college education, so don't get me wrong. I think, you know, most of you that haven't been to college, especially those of you who are, you know, I just got somebody put a comment on my thing saying, you know, trying to give me WikiLeaks or something like that, saying that Pizzagate was a real thing, you know, and there's no doubt in my mind we're talking about people who just aren't educated and aren't interested in learning how to think critically. So don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in college education, but there are some places where there are some holes. When it comes to things like this, academia has some real big problems. And so when I was writing this book, I was defending myself against the critics that were coming at me and saying, you don't have footnotes, you don't do that. It's because there's just no footnotes. You know, how do you give footnotes for, learning from a Vedic master about seed sounds and how they relate to Indo-European language. You're not going to find that in any books. So this is where a lot of my knowledge comes from. You can choose to accept it or reject it. All right, the goal of this book and all of my works in this area is designed to give the reader a personal, practical, and visceral connection to their ancestors and their traditions. But you need not be of Germanic descent to make use of this book. This information can be used by anyone of any religion or ethnic background seeking to reconnect to an authentic, prehistoric, polytheist, and animist experience of our three-dimensional world we Teutons call Middle Earth. As with my other works, this book is written in a specific order, but you are also free to bounce around through whatever chapters to which you feel drawn. Enjoy. All right. Teutonic versus Vedic. In the first sections of this book, we will investigate Teutonic deities that share a common linguistic root with Vedic deities. In later sections, we will look at deities and concepts unique to the Germanic tribes. Examining these similarities and differences will point to an older Indo-European religious tradition that influenced both the Vedic and the Germanic traditions. In many cases, we shall see that even though Sanskrit, Vedic language, is the oldest written Indo-European language, the Germanic names for Indo-European deities seem to reflect an older, more primal version of Indo-European polytheist animism, which perhaps reflects the older, more shamanic version of the original Indo-European religion. Thunor and Indra. I have named my spiritual practice Thunder Wizardry after the Anglo-Saxon god of thunder. The modern word, now, I've changed my mind about this, but at this time, this is what I thought. And I kind of had my doubts, but I went ahead and wrote it anyway. But what I'm about to say, I don't think is entirely accurate. I think there's some truth to it, but it's not entirely accurate. The modern word thunder is actually the modern English pronunciation of the Anglo-Saxon thunder god named Thunor. Whenever anyone speaks the word thunder, whether they be atheist, agnostic, Christian, or of any other religious persuasion, they are speaking the name of the pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon thunder god. In the Mediterranean Indo-European religions, the thunder god is also the sky father and head of the pantheon. This is evidenced by the gods Zeus and Jupiter. In the Germanic pantheon, the Vedic pantheon, on the other hand, in the Germanic pantheon and the Vedic pantheon, on the other hand, the thunder god is not the head of the pantheon, but is the offspring of the god of the heavens and the earth mother goddess. In the Scandinavian pantheon, Thor is the son of Odin and the giantess Earth. In the continental Germanic pantheon, Donar is the son of Wotan and Hole. Similarly, in the Vedic tradition, the thunder god Indra is the son of Dieus Pita, sky father, and Prithvi, earth mother. We already know that the original Germanic head of the gods was Tiw, which is cognate with Dieus, Zeus, and Deupater, Jupiter. Around the time of the Roman conquest of Europe, there seems to have been a shift in the Germanic pantheon where Tiw was replaced by Woden, Wod, shamanic consciousness, plus N, which means master. Really, it doesn't mean master, it means composed of. So the word Woden means composed of shamanic ecstasy. Doesn't mean he is shamanic ecstasy. It means that he is made of it. That's why we call him the master of shamanic ecstasy. As the new leader of the gods, Woden took over the position of the All-Father from Tiw, the traditional Indo-European sky father. So it is no surprise that Indra is the son of Dieus Pita, or sky father, since Tiw, Tyr, Zeus, Jupiter, and Dieus Pita are all names of the same Indo-European sky father who originally ruled the gods. In fact, it is the same name. It's just different pronunciations and different dialects of Indo-European. Tiw, Tyr, Zeus. The Zeus is actually the vocative form. The name for Zeus actually in Greek was Di. And a temple was Dion, the place of Di. Tiw, Di, same thing. Jupiter and Deus Pita. Jupiter and Deus Pita are the same word. Jupiter is just a contraction of Diupiter. Diu, sky, Piter, father. Piter is also ancestor, so sky ancestor. Deus Pita. Deus, sky, Deus, Pita, father, sky father. See, it's all the same word. Deus Pita, Zeus, Jupiter. Even in the Chinese, Di, it's the same thing. So, this sky father who originally ruled the gods, then it is only logical to assume that in Germanic Europe, before Woden was assimilated into the Germanic pantheon and replaced Tiw on the throne of Asgard, Thunor was most likely originally thought of as being the son of Tiw and Mother Earth. According to the Vedas, Indra became the head of the gods and master of thunder only after defeating his father Deus Pita and receiving the power of thunder and lightning from him. Since the Vedas are at least 4,000 years old and share the same understanding as the Germanic tribes that the thunder god is the son of the ruler of the heavens, then it is logical to assume that the Vedic pantheon reflects a later shift in Indo-European religion that was occurring in the Indo-European mother culture around the time that both the Germanic tribes and the Vedic tribes migrated to their eventual homelands. The reader should note that these hypothetical migrations I'm referring to by the Vedic and Germanic tribes may have taken place tens of thousands of years ago and do not reflect a hypothesis connected to the popular but inaccurate Aryan migration theory, which has been taught as fact by historians for hundreds of years. If the Vedic tribes and the Germanic tribes were once part of an earlier single culture, it is very possible that they separated from each other tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps even in Paleolithic Africa with the first modern humans who migrated into the northern hemisphere. It is possible that our Proto-Indo-European ancestors were worshipping these same gods 50,000 years ago in Africa. This shift of replacing the Sky Father as the wielder of the thunderbolt to the sun as the god of thunder is not seen in the Mediterranean Indo-European pantheons, and therefore must have taken place later after the Greek and Roman tribes split from the Indo-European mother culture, while the Sky Father god was still seen as the sole possessor of the thunderbolt. That's a really long sentence. And then you can't see this here, but I have a graph showing the origins. So let's see here. Thunder god, Thunor, Anglo-Saxon, origins, son of Woden and Earth. Donar, continental Germanic, son of Wotan and Hole. Thor, Scandinavian, son of Odin and Earth. Indra, Vedic, received thunderbolt after defeating his father. Origins, son of Deus Pita, Sky Father, and Prithvi, Earth Mother. Zeus, Greek pronounced Zeus, DZ. So the Z is pronounced like Z, DZ. Cognate with Vedic Deus. Head of Greek pantheon. Jupiter, Roman contraction of Deus Piter, Diupiter, head of the Roman pantheon. There's another very strong linguistic link between the Germanic god Thunor and the Vedic god Indra, which seems to point to a relatively recent connection between the Vedic culture and the Germanic tribes. So as you can see, I'm making the argument here that the Vedic and the Germanic, from what I can tell, and bear in mind, I am not at all an expert in Celtic or in Slavic polytheism. I know next to nothing about them. But just looking at the difference between Vedic and Mediterranean, like Roman and Greek. Obviously there's a connection, but there seems to be a bigger difference. There seems to be more of a similarity between the Germanic and the Vedic. So I'm continuing with that because that's what the evidence seems to show me, which is why I have such a strong emotional agenda about connecting the two of them, why it's so exciting for me, why I practice simultaneously Vedic mantra and still I work with Scandinavian deities because I think they're related. They're very closely related. There is another very strong linguistic link between the Germanic god Thunar and the Vedic god Indra, which seems to point to a relatively recent connection between the Vedic culture and the Germanic tribes. According to my research, the names Thunar and Indra are merely different pronunciations of the same name. In order to understand this link, we need to do some linguistic sleuthing. According to some scholars, the name Indra is a production of 3 words. In, du, ra, which means, what did I say here? Which means Lord of the bright drop, or Lord of the full or bright moon. In means bright. Du means drop or moon. And Ra means king. Indura, ruler of the full moon. Right? So I'm going to say something to that effect here. Indra, which means Lord of the bright drop or Lord of the full moon. In means bright. Du means drop of soma, ambrosial nectar of immortality. And Ra means Lord or ruler. Soma is one of the current names for the moon in Vedic spirituality. Soma was originally the drink of inspiration and immortality favored by Indra. The nectar of the Soma drink gave Indra his power, and consequently he drank vast quantities of it. According to the Vedas, the moon was the distilled essence of the nectar of immortality, which is why the moon is called Soma, nectar, and also called Chandra. Chandra is simply just another pronunciation of the English word shiner. You can see and hear the similarities because it's the same word. Chandra, shiner, same word. CH in Anglo-Saxon, Northwest Germanic is a CH, SH sound. That's why we have ship. Ship, and you've heard the word skipper or skiff. It's all the same word. It's because SC is often pronounced as SH. Ship, skipper, skiff. So Chandra, if you speak it with a Germanic accent, is going to be shiner. Chandra, shiner, 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 Chandra, same thing. Got me? All right, let's keep going. So the name Indra can mean ruler of the bright, shining moon. Okay, Thu, the ancient power of ambrosia. All right. Thu, ambrosial nectar or moon. From my studies of Vedic mysticism, I discovered that one of the more obscure Vedic sacred seed sounds for the power of the moon and the waters of life is pronounced thum, which is the root word thu plus the activator, which is also happens to be a rune, the ing sound. Okay, thum is thu plus ng sound, which we'll talk about later. Thum. So in Vedic mysticism, I probably explained this. I'll just read it. I'm sure I'd probably explain it here. The mantric seed sound consists of the root thu plus the activator sound of ng. This ng sound in esoteric Vedic mantra magic is thought to be the root sound of the sacrificial fire that sends the power of the chant to the heavens as a sacrifice to the gods. Sound familiar? Most Vedic seed mantras have this ng sound affixed to them. Many people see this ng sound written as M. in English as in the well-known mantric sound Om. So Om, which everybody knows, is actually pronounced Ong, not Ong. Don't be a stupid American and not know how to deal with vowels. That O is a long O. Ong. Now, not even a lot of Vedic scholars and masters and practitioners, not even they know that. That M sound is an NG sound. And if you know how to read, which I'm not saying I do, but if you know how to read the Devangari script, you can tell the difference between an M and an NG sound. But when it's translated to English, it's always just translated as M. Let's continue. Most Vedic seed mantras have this NG sound affixed to them. Many people see this NG sound written as M in English, as in the well-known mantric sound Om. But in actuality, this M sound is pronounced NG. The back of the tongue is placed on the roof of the mouth as the mantra is chanted, resulting in a vibration that activates the pineal gland, which aids in shamanic consciousness. In other words, you can still close your lips, but you want the back of your tongue to hit the roof of your mouth. Om. Got it? I believe the use of this NG sound in satric Vedic chants points to an ancient connection to the runic sound Ing, or the rune itself. Which is also the mystical fire which sends the prayers and sacrifices to the gods in Asgard. For more info on this sound, refer to the chapter on the Ing rune in my earlier book, Rune Shamanism. I'll go over very quickly what it is. So, you know the Ing rune, right? Which is, oh, look at that, right on top. This symbol right here, right? This is the Ing rune. Now, if you go, even today, in places in England or in, I don't know if it's in Scandinavia, but I think in Germany too, you'll find this on the outside of people's chimneys. It's just something that people traditionally do. There was, I was watching some show where they were going through really old, like the oldest castles or places in England where, you know, the first kings and queens lived. And on the mantelpiece above one of the huge fireplaces in one of these, you know, giant castles, you see the Ing rune all carved in the shelf above the fireplace. That tells you something. I mean, if that you know, even into this day, in places in Germanic Europe, people still paint the Ing rune, or they carve the Ing rune onto the fireplace. What does that tell you? That's where Ing lives, the fire, the sacrificial fire. So, for more info on this sound, refer to the chapter on the Ing rune in my earlier book, Rune Shamanism. Mystical Vedic seed sounds are often taught as being nonsensical sounds that have no connection to spoken human language. They are believed to be the language of the gods and therefore are believed to be beyond human understanding. I'm being kind here. What I'm trying to say is that even these Vedic masters do not understand Indo-European language. It's been so long, they're so far removed. When you ask a Vedic scholar, what are these seed sounds? Om, Shrim, Hrim, Kring, Ing, Thung. What are they? They'll say, oh, those are nonsensical power syllables. But they're not. They are the roots of our language, which means our language is itself a magical thing. When you speak our language, the Indo-European language, you are speaking power into the universe. So when you take bits and pieces of that language, it's like looking at, it's like you're taking molecules and you're looking at all the different things inside of that makes up a molecule. There's power there. So my research leads me, so I was saying here, that they are believed to be the language of the gods and therefore are believed to be beyond human understanding. My research leads me to a different conclusion. While we may not understand these sounds now, and while they are undoubtedly of spiritual origin, these seed sounds are the original sounds of human language, and the original speakers of these sounds knew what these sounds meant. Seed sound mantras were not nonsense power syllables. They were functional words in everyday Proto-Indo-European language that were spoken with complete understanding. They lost their meaning among the lay people as Indo-European languages have slowly changed over tens of thousands of years. I have come to discover that since mystics are much more conservative in preserving original language and pronunciation than lay people, it is possible that many of these seed mantras are the forgotten verbal building blocks of the original Indo-European language that have been preserved and handed down orally by priests and magicians over the millennia. Hence why there's not going to be any academic who's going to even have the slightest clue about any of this. These magical seed sounds would have been kept secret from the average layperson for fear that the power of these words would be abused or diluted by the uninitiated. Over time, since these sounds were only transmitted orally by priests and shamans since before the advent of writing, it only makes sense that as language changed over thousands of years, that the priests would not remember these sacred sounds as being part of their spoken language. As these words lost their relevance to everyday speech, eventually they became nonsensical, magical sounds only uttered by priests and magicians. This process is seen in many different cultures. Here in the United States, which I'm not living in anymore, here in the USA, Navajo priests learn very lengthy chants that reflect an older dialect of their language that is unintelligible to modern speakers of the Navajo language. The archaic Navajo chants are believed to be so powerful that they must be spoken perfectly. Any mispronunciation is thought to bring great misfortune, including injury or death to the speaker. That's actually interesting because when I learned drumming from one of my Yoruba teachers, he said the same thing about drum rhythms. That they're done with an ensemble, and everybody has their little part or their longer part, and all of these things come together. And when you put them all together, it creates a vortex. It creates an equation that actually opens up a vortex, and that's when the gods and the ancestors come. And anybody who's been to one of my classes and learns these things, you'll start to feel it. You like hear weird things and feel weird things. Weird things happen when you do it right. He said the same thing. He said that if just one of the drummers hits the wrong note, he curses the whole village. These things have to be done right. So let's see. So I was talking about the Navajo. So the Navajo has the same idea. If you don't chant it perfectly, you could bring real harm because their power. When you're dealing with that much power, it's like you're sitting in a lab and you're putting different chemicals together. You put the wrong chemical in, it could blow up in your face. Similarly, I believe that many of the Vedic and Hindu sacred seed mantras are actually forgotten pronunciations of the ancient Indo-European mother tongue. I mention this because, as you will see, the name Thunor reflects some of the original pronunciation of the original sacred Indo-European mother tongue for calling upon and releasing the waters of life through the power of thunder. I will show other correlations later in the book. For now, let's stay focused on Thunor and Indra. Indra is said to be the protector of humans against the serpent dragon Vritra. Vritra means the enveloper, who held back the waters of life. Indra defeated Vritra with his thunderbolt and was able to free the waters of life that were being held back by the dragon Vritra. Those familiar with Teutonic mythology will immediately see the resemblance of Vritra to the serpent Jormungandr that envelops the waters of the earth. According to the Vedas, Indra wages war against the moon every month. When the moon is full, Indra will fly into the sky, capture the moon, and bring it down underneath the earth and force it to produce life-giving soma for him to drink. He literally squeezes it out. During this time when there was no moon in the sky, it was believed that Indra was under the earth squeezing the soma nectar from the moon. This would result in the earth secreting this soma on the earth's surface as morning dew. But as soon as the moon was squeezed of its nectar, it would slip out of Indra's grasp and fly back into the sky and slowly regain his strength and grow full of soma juice, which would be the full moon, and the cycle would repeat. So can you see where I'm going here? By researching the language in Vedic mysticism, I found that the original name for Indra was possibly Inthura, which means ruler Ra of the bright in drop of ambrosial nectar, Thu. It seems that by the time of the Vedics, their pronunciation of their dialect of Indo-European had already dropped the voiced th sound that still survives in Old English as the eth letter or the thurisaj rune. And so over time, Thu became pronounced as Du when combined to create the full name of Indra. When these three syllables, Inthura, are pronounced together in the Sanskrit language, they are shortened to create Indra. So now let's look at Thunar. According to most Western scholars, the source of Thunar's name is lost to time, academics. Unless we were to look at the Vedic myths in light of their possible connection to traditional Vedic mystical seed chants. According to the Vedics, Indra is the ruler of the moon. If the name Thunar is derived from the same Indo-European linguistic source as Indra, then we may see a similarity in Thunar's name construction to that of Indra's. If we take the word bright out of Indra's name, we get Dura, ruler Ra of the drop of moon, Du. If we revert the Sanskrit pronunciation of Du to its earlier form of the Vedic proto-syllable pronunciation for moon, Thu. So you see what I mean? Even in Vedic, they will say that the root for the moon is Thu. But because of, the way they talk, that th becomes, they don't pronounce a th like we do. It's Thu. Same thing with Scandinavian, by the way. They write Thor, but ask a Scandinavian, what's the name of the thunder god? They'll say Thor. They make it more like a T, like a voiced T. Anyway, so we're getting closer to Thunar, which is why the Germanic version of the thunder god is pronounced Thunar instead of Thura. Oh, so that's a question. So why is the Germanic version of the thunder god pronounced Thunar instead of Thura? The Anglo-Saxon suffix of nor is derived from the Indo-European suffix nar, which means lord or ruler. Coincidentally, in Sanskrit, one of the names for the supreme head of the Vedic Hindu pantheon is Narayana. In that word, the symbol nar can be translated as ruler or even first cause. So if we can combine the Vedic seed sound for the moon Thu with the Indo-European suffix of rulership nar, we get Thunar. The Anglo-Saxons had adopted the Scandinavian habit of changing a to o sounds. So for the Anglo-Saxons, Thunar became Thunor. In East Germanic, pronunciation eventually dropped the voiced th sounds and replaced them with d sounds. So the Eastern Germanic tribes pronounced his name Donar. Scandinavians may have shortened his name from Thunor to simply Thor. As it happens, the extinct Hittite language, which is also Indo-European, it's an extinct Indo-European language, had a thunder god they referred to as both Indara and Du. So once again, I have a graph here, which you can't see, but I'll try and... It says name, root sounds, and meaning. And then Thunor is Thu plus Nar, meaning ruler of the lunar waters of life. Then you have Indra, which is Ing, Thu, Ra, which means celestial ruler of the bright lunar drop of ambrosial nectar. In Hittite, you have Indara, similar to Vedic. And it means sky father or storm god. So that's interesting. So Indara was their sky father. And it is also true that the Vedics, once by the time we get to the Vedic time, they are worshiping Indra as the head of the gods. He is the king. He might as well be the father. So the same as the Hittites and the Vedics were both worshiping Indra as like the sky god, the sky father. So, and then Du in the Hittite for storm. So one of the words for storm in Hittite was Du. Thu. So we have drop. So thu also means drop, raindrop. So you got all that. It's like what happens when the thunder strikes, raindrops fall, right? So that's thunar, releasing the waters of life. All right. If I'm correct, then thunar is also lord of the dewdrops. As we all know from our own experiences, water oftentimes condenses in the early pre-dawn hours and is seen at sunrise as drops of water or frost on the leaves of plants, as though it had magically seeped up through the earth during the night, which is actually what happens. We call this nighttime condensation dew, which has a remarkable similarity in pronunciation to the Vedic seed sound for drop of nectar, thu, and the middle syllable of Indra's name, du, meaning drop of nectar. It is my belief that our modern English word dew is actually a very ancient Indo-European word for the ambrosial nectar seeping up from inside the earth that was squeezed out of the new moon by the thunder god, who eagerly sought the nectar of life and gave it to all beings on earth. Since words that are used most on a daily basis, like mama and papa, often tend to keep their pronunciations for very long periods of time and are found simultaneously in multiple diverging cultures. Speaking of which, what do you think the Yoruba word for mother and father is? Mama, baba. What does that tell you? English has preserved the ancient Indo-European word for the drop of ambrosial nectar of life for thousands of years in its earlier form, dew. So every time you hear someone use the word dewdrop, you can take note of the power of the myth and the word to convey spiritual symbolism through the centuries. I believe, based on this research, that Proto-Vedic Indo-Europeans called the god of thunder Ingthura, and the Proto-Germanic tribes called him Thunar. In each case, both names are constructed from the magical one-syllable Proto-Indo-European sound for the moon ambrosial nectar, pronounced Thu. Why is Thunar's name ruler of the drop instead of ruler of lightning? This, I believe, is a result of natural effects that were observed by our Indo-European animist ancestors who preserved their understanding in our myths and names of deities. Okay, so now I'm going to give you the same example I already did. If you've ever been in a thunderstorm, you know that before the raindrop falls, we hear the sound of approaching thunder, or sometimes the thunder and lightning strike overhead, followed immediately by a deluge of raindrops. It's as if the thunder is a necessary first cause in order to release the rain. This natural phenomenon is reflected in the Vedic myths as Indra defeating Vritra, the water dragon, with his thunderbolt that releases the water. Sorry, I got to put my ice pack down. Releases the water from the clouds and abates the drought. Thunar was valued more immediately for his ability to release the water from the clouds to feed the crops than he was for making lightning. Lightning and thunder must have simply been the natural effect of the act of releasing the waters. Our ancestors' first concern was to water their crops to feed their families. So it is the scepter of lightning that allows Thunar to rule over the much desired drops of water. Hence, this importance would have been reflected in his name as ruler of the drops, or Thunar. Now, I am about to enter into Thunar and electromagnetism, which is a whole other thing, and I'm going to get all hyped up about that. So I think I'm going to stop for now, and I'll check to see if there are any questions. So we'll go all the way back up to the top. Dean Evans questions, are there any Norse myths that describe someone using the runes? I only know the story of how Odin discovered the runes. You know what? Pretty much you and I have the same understanding. I'm not aware of others. I'm sure there are. There's other writings out there that are pretty old. I wouldn't know if I would call them mythological, but you know, you can find them as easily as I can. I found them just by, searching the net. So short answer, no. CRA, Nerthus was the way it was written, but it's believed that the Latin version, Nerthus, was actually pronounced Nerthuj. Veronica Secret, Eliade. What is that? You have to write a whole sentence? Because I don't know what that is. You're throwing a name out? What are you trying to say? Come on, be part of the discussion here. Bryce Gertson, question. Can you do the Hool breath seated on the floor and achieve the same results? Yep. not going to be as powerful. Why do you want to do it seated on the floor? You mean like yogic style? If my experience is, well, as I'm trying to say this, I'm feeling the impulse to say no. If you want to do it in the Vedic style, you can. Yeah, it'll work in whatever position you want. If you want to go full lotus, really do that whole thing, you might get something out of it also. My experience is I get more out of it if I'm seated on a chair with my back straight and my feet on the floor and my hands, out to the side, the way that I teach how to do it. That's how I get the most out of it. That's why I teach it that way. Dean Evans' question, does Odin have a connection to Ketu? I'm not going to say no. Ketu is Ganesha. So Ketu is the headless body of the serpent. I can't say no, but I mean, if we're going by planets, Odin is Mercury. He says, I'm trying to see if the Ketu-Rahu relationship can give me insight into the Odin-Loki relationship. Oh, I see what you're doing here. So Loki is Rahu. Yeah, so Odin and Loki are more like the flip side of themselves. So Rahu is in his exaltation in Gemini, which is a Mercury sign. So I wouldn't try and make them Odin and Loki as being like, polar opposites to each other. They're actually the same thing. Rahu and Ketu are polar opposites. So Odin and Loki are actually Rahu. They're more closely aligned to Rahu than they are to Ketu. Ketu would be more, if you have to give another planet to Ketu, it would be Mars. Ketu is fiery, so it would be Mars and Jupiter. Odin is air, so you want to associate him more with air planets, which would be Mercury or Saturn. Is Shiva connected to Ketu? Yes. In that that Ketu, the direction for Shiva, one of the aspects of Shiva is the northeast. So if you had to place, we technically don't place Ketu in any of the directions because Ketu doesn't have a head, so he doesn't have eyes, so he doesn't see. But if we had to place him somewhere, we would place him in the northeast, which is where the highest ether is, which is where Shiva, what's his name? Shiva has multiple directions, so don't get me wrong. What's his name? I forget. That name of Shiva's escaping me, but it's the name of Shiva that's in the northeast. I can't remember it. For some reason, it's escaping me. Okay, I don't see any more questions here, so I'm going to call it a day. We've been on for over an hour. Has it been over an hour? I don't know. How long has it been? It's been a while. Let me check here. This says that I've been, for an hour and 15 minutes just about. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here for today. Any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments section. We're still doing the lockdown package. Take a look at that. If you want to support the channel as well, you can go to thunderwizard.com and subscribe at whatever level you want. If you subscribe at the lowest level, you get access to all of the master shamanism videos and courses, which I go into great detail, which I don't do here on this channel to that extent. You can also subscribe to the manifestation mastery course. If you really want to learn how to intend your reality, I go into great detail there in those channels. And then courses.thunderwizard.com, you can find these books if you want to get these books. Of course, subscribe and hit the bell button, and you will be immediately granted the end to all reincarnation. If you want to escape the matrix, you have to subscribe and hit the bell button. That's the first step. All right, so that's it. Nothing else. I'll see you guys very soon.